out to U of H. I've been doing work actually with U of H at Rice for many, many years. Go way back to Speed Center when it formed in right after Hurricane Ike. U of H was a main participant there and still is. So today I'm going to talk about detention storage, a vital element, I think, for flood control in Houston. Now you've seen these pictures many, many times over. I'm sure you've seen them at this conference, but I like to show it because it kind of demonstrates the three types of flooding that did occur during Harvey. The massive infrastructure problem with just complete devastation of roadways and freeways. Obviously the Brays Bayou flooding, I think Brays is the one that was hit the worst. And I used to live in the Brays Bayou Watershed, but I got out of there fortunately in '84 and headed west and never looked back. And then finally the Addis-Barker scenario out on the far west side. Over 125 billion in damages. I thought for sure it would exceed Katrina, but I guess it didn't quite make it. But I think the 200,000 is an overestimate. I think it's closer to 125,000 based upon new data. Thousands rescued. So today, in this talk, I want to try to address three issues: land development issues and how we got here in Houston. How do engineers and scientists analyze these problems? There'll be a quiz on that a little bit later, just know that. And finally, I want to really stress and talk about detention storage issues with three examples, one from Brays, one from Cypress Creek on the west side, Addis-Barker, and then finally a little bit on White Oak Bayou. I just want to use these three watersheds as three case studies of where I think detention and whether it's regional or local can be a big help in terms of managing our flood waters. Now, I've been watching development practices in Houston for a long time. I've been at Rice for 4 decades. I used to drive in and along Brays Bayou to work many, many, many years, and it was a bayou that worked pretty well for about 20 or 30 years, and then all hell broke loose starting in the late 90s, and then once Alison hit, and then we got into the 3 floods in a row, Memorial Day and Tax Day, and then finally, of course, Harvey. So what has happened, and what happens in Houston, is we take this really, really, really flat slope area, and we're talking about a foot per mile, right? So Rice sits at 50 feet, 50 miles away is Galveston. Well, a foot per mile is the slope. And in order to be able to live here, we cut the streets down, we build the houses up. We haven't been building them up quite enough, apparently of late, but we build them up a little bit. The general rule has been, in modern times anyway, somewhere around 18 inches or so above the center line of the street. It's now gone to 2 feet above the 500-year level, so that's taking some houses way up in the air. But in so doing, in that middle graph, you end up with a lot more runoff feeding down through that system. It's not just imperviousness. I always hear that. Oh, it's the added imperviousness. Well, we have a lot of clay soils here. So it's not just the imperviousness. It turns out it's a combination of imperviousness and a lot of channels, a lot of drainage density, a lot of drainage infrastructure that feeds the water in a lot faster. So we tend to see a tripling of flow from an undeveloped area to a fully developed area. So that tripling of flow has got to go somewhere. It's either going to go in a bayou where you've enlarged and expanded it, or it's going to go into your neighbor's house, one or the other, depending upon the situation. And as we have allowed that development to take place in many of our watersheds, especially in the westward direction, it's created real serious flood problems. In areas where we can go in and mitigate, for example, where we can go in and put ponds or put in storage and bring those flow levels back, then there's a chance. But the concept is that you've got to add enough storage so that you cause no adverse impact. You can't just put in a little bit of storage, you've got to put in a lot of storage. Here's what happened to Brays. It's my favorite watershed. I've studied it for 40 years. And I'm very sad about what has happened out there. It didn't have to happen, but it did. In 1970, I came to Rice in '75. Look at the way that watershed looked, and it worked fine. It was just a very well protected area. The channel worked, everything worked fine, and then in a span of about 40 years, it went to full development. And the thought was that the bayou, in fact, by 85 to 90, it could only carry a 10-year flood, about 6 inches of rain. It was originally designed to carry about 15 inches of rain. There's Meyerland. If you kind of look, the bayou is kind of stretching through the middle there. So for those of you that are from out of town, here comes the bayou. Meyerland's back over in here. And you get out here, and there it goes, and then there's a tributary feeds in here. But look at this. This was all put in place in a very, very short period of time, probably about a 20-year period. In the upper end, there are about 30 or 40 car dealerships out there, each and every one 9.9 acres, exactly so that they didn't have to put in any detention, grandfathered in. And then Meyerland wonders why they flood. Well, you just look at the map there, it's pretty obvious. Now, notice, there's a golf course there, and there's a golf course there, and there's a big green space there. And that's what I'm looking at, and I think that's also what the city of Houston is looking at and others for potential future options for trying to do something about these types of bayous where Brays is typical. So, today, in terms of trying to address some of these problems, there is some technology there. So we are a university, and so we're supposed to be developing these new technologies. And the consulting world and Harris County Flood Control and Army Corps of Engineers and others are all running with these technologies as well. And we use these models, both hydrologic and hydraulic models. We feed that together with new information like LIDAR data and so on. And that allows us to do a much better job of updating land use and storage options, looking at different flow levels and allowing for detailed mapping of floodplains. And we all know that the floodplains are fairly inaccurate right now and they need to be greatly improved. I would hope, and I'll make a plea here, we're working off 2008, I believe, LIDAR data right now, and we're desperately waiting for the 2016 or 2018 data to come out. And it is yet to come out. And so we're already 10 years out of date with the information. That data feeds in to land use and soil types, and then we can create hydrologic models in order to make these predictions, in order to estimate who's going to flood, where's it going to flood, and how deep. And here's one of those estimates for Brays Bayou. And we have a detention pond here in Brays Bayou. It's called Meyerland. I know you laugh. And how many, anyone here live in Meyerland and got flooded out? I know that wasn't a joke, but quite frankly, it's true. If that detention pond and that backup behind the 610 loop and in that low area that's probably due to some subsidence, et cetera, if that didn't exist, then U of H would flood and Rice would flood and Med Center would flood worse. It would just translate that downstream. And look at the upstream end, and that's such an unusual floodplain. It's pretty unusual to have a floodplain way up here, and then look how great this does down here. Now, part of that's related to slope, and part of that's just related to blockage, pure and simple. Just can't get through the 610 loop. Here's what Brays did. This is just astounding when you look at it. Now, on the left is project price. $455 million Army Corps of Engineer project. I signed on to that the very first time I heard about it. I said, do anything you do will be an improvement. A lot of money, because they had already spent $200 million, I think, earlier for the original bayou back in the 60s. But here you see a new project, but it still won't provide 100-year protection. And clearly during Harvey, it wasn't, of course, fully in place, and you can just see the pictures speak for themselves. Here's the problem out there. This is all the FEMA data in and around Brays, and you can just see it just shouldn't be like this. This shouldn't be a smart city like Houston that put men on the moon, Space Center Houston, medical center of the world. Actually, have done a pretty good job on their transportation system. The flood system shouldn't look like this. An example, a really good example, and I was proud to be part of this, back post-Alison era, is going into the Texas Medical Center, and we had no choice. You couldn't put much storage in there. We tried, we looked. There just wasn't much place to put storage. And so we ended up in that project putting in and altering the infrastructure, putting in 3 culverts in place of the 1 or 2 that were there, and building those back in and kind of resulted in, it was a $50 million or so investment, resulted in, believe it or not, no flooding at all in Harvey, which I was astounded to see. I thought for sure during Harvey, the Texas Medical Center flood, that it did not. So it all worked. There's the 500-year, and there's Harvey and on Brays. And it's just, you know, I mean, these are devastating floodplains. I mean, that's reaching almost all the way across the watershed. All right? And it just shouldn't be like that. So we'll come back to trying to figure out, and then of course in Harvey, it was 3 feet higher than in the Memorial Day flood. So here's you know, Project Brays. And it's got some detention ponds, yes, but notice they're way upstream, and they're also on the ridgeline. And it's fine. Any and all detention helps, but there are better places to put it than those places. Now, Art Story Park, yes, works great. I'm a big fan of Art Story Park. But this doesn't produce 100-year protection. More storage is needed. And there probably is going to have to be some major buyouts unless you're going to have people all in Ireland living at 6 to 8 feet above the driveway level, meaning they're going to have to walk upstairs the rest of their life. Okay, so a little bit of Brays, and I'll come back to it with what I think are some options for improving it. Now, let's switch gears and head west. Massive runoff into Cypress Creek caused overflow into attics, limited downstream capacity, created this huge problem, this overbank flow. It's been known for years. In fact, when they designed the reservoirs, they knew about the overflow. So that limited attics and Barker storage, I mean, that fed right into the reservoirs with a lot more runoff, a lot more water feeding in. And there's clearly a need for more storage on the west side in some way, shape, or form. This is my favorite graph. If you thought flooding and flood analysis was a simple problem, and you could do it watershed by watershed by watershed, forget about it. Those days are gone forever now. Now we have to consider this as a combined, complex problem. And there are a variety of stakeholder groups here as well. There's the Katy Prairie Conservancy. There's the overflow area. There's Attucks and Barker. Then there's Buffalo Bayou downstream. There's Buffalo Bayou upstream. White Oak feeds in. There's downtown. By the time you just rattle all those off, it's a rather perplexing and complex problem. And so this is going to take some really smart engineering, planning, designing, and a lot of feedback from local community groups. This can't be just, we just can't engineer our way out of this easily. This is a really complex problem. And I'm glad to hear and I'm glad to see that a lot of those conversations are taking place, and there's a lot of angst out there. I understand that, but there ought to be, because there are a lot of very upset people. This is the largest flood in U.S. history, and it put a bit of a black eye on the city of Houston going forward, and the county, and now we need to move beyond that and head toward a more comprehensive, if you will, overview look at what's going on here. Here is what I'm talking about. For example, in Cypress Creek, we can no longer run the standard models of practice, which are one-dimensional, what are called HEC RAS models. Now we have to run 1D, 2D. And to run a 2D model means we have to lay in a 2D Spider-Man grid over that blue area and look at all of that overflow feeding in. That's a complex undertaking, and yet it has to be done. And I show you this because, by the way, this technology has actually only been around for about a year accurately. It was out a few years before that, but now it's a fairly accurate code and people are routinely doing this. But it's fairly new. And we're going to have to run these types of models on all of our watersheds in order to really do a good job with the future rainfalls, the future increases in flows, and so on and so forth. Here's what we have in the overflow. We have just in Attucks alone, we have 4 or 5 tributaries that feed in, and all of this spills over into these creeks. So you've got to be able to manage that and understand that in order to, if you will, control and design the outflows coming out of Attucks. And obviously with all the development that's taken place out there in the fringe areas, and you've seen this map many, many times presented in the newspaper. I don't need to argue the point, but the flooding impacts have clearly exacerbated on that western side. And that's what happened. I mean, I think that's the addicts area, and you know, it was just inescapable. I drove by that area for 10 years with Sanko Ranch. I drove by there on my way to Austin. I never realized, never in my wildest dreams did I realize all those homes were in harm's way. I don't think anyone in this room did either. I mean, it came as a total surprise to me. There's Barker at 95 feet. This is on the south side, so this is south of I-10. And there's Sanko Ranch, and that's under the flood condition. So there's what's called the government pool. There it is under flood condition. Every single house in some of those mud districts in Sanko Ranch flooded. And I'm talking about flooding 2 to 3 feet. And so what do you do about that? I mean, you know, that's just a really, really, really serious problem. And one of the things that has been suggested, and I think it's kind of an interesting plan, you know, it's got to be studied, it's got to be evaluated. But one of the things that's being suggested by Fort Bend County is to go in and think about putting a levee right there where I'm showing you the levee, and put in pump stations, gates and pump stations, and if you will, protect those folks that are in harm's way. And then during the high flood condition, then those pumps would turn on and they would drain those areas out and they'd pump back into the reservoir. And obviously you'd have to add in more storage. You'd have to dig part of that reservoir out and add in more storage. This is one of the solutions for regional storage is being considered by Fort Bend County. I actually think it's worthy of taking a look at. And I know there's anybody out there from Harris County will say, oh, no, we can't do anything with pumps. We can't have any pumps in Harris County. Well, they have them all over Fort Bend County. Pump storage is all over. It's all over South Florida. All of South Florida is pump storage. So we know it works. Modern technology allows those pumps to be backed up. And it might be a good plan, it might be worthy of some evaluation. Finally, that's my second example. And I see I've got 45 more minutes. I only give 50-minute talks, guys, I'm sorry. No, I'm almost done here. But let's look at White Oak Bayou. Now we're in the process of building out a flood warning system for White Oak Bayou with funding from the Kinder Institute and with support from the city of Houston as well. And White Oak is, again, it's sort of like Brays in a lot of ways. It's got these serious floodplain kind of issues. Certainly they have some down here, and that's because of road crossings and backups behind freeways and whatever, especially in Little White Oak. But then look at this. That's what we call an overflow area, potentially going from White Oak, Maine over into one of the tribs. So this is not something you run with simple models. This is that overflow problem again. And so there are parts of these watersheds that are going to have to be addressed with 1D, 2D models and so on. And then similarly, you could potentially, this is just the 100-year. If I were to plot the 500-year, which is theoretically the new design level, you'd probably get similar sorts of things happening down in this area. So there are just lots of issues here with areas like White Oak, and these are the, White Oak and Brays, those are the two watersheds that had the big federal concrete channel projects on them, all right? And this is the condition that they find themselves in today due to what I complain, or what I claim, is the fact that they just didn't put in enough detention. Now they're working, don't get me wrong, they're working hard trying to find these areas and find these open spaces. And there needs to be an effort to, for example, go into buyout zones and not only buy out houses, but also turn those into some useful green space or some useful detention area. Don't just walk away from the flat slabs. It makes no sense to do that. Okay. My final few graphics, I'm going to take you out to Sugar Land. I'm going to take you out to the Fort Bend County area. And I live out there. I drove around during Harvey as soon as I could get out, and that was sort of on Monday morning, I believe, I was out driving around. And, the Dutch have this saying, and we interact with the Dutch quite a bit over at TU Delft, and there's a big program over there called Make Room for the River. It's a Dutch program, it's very famous, you can Google it up. And I think for Houston, We don't want to call it a river because we don't have that many rivers, we have bayous. And it could be called make room for the bayou or make room for the water or whatever you want to call it. But you don't see a whole lot of areas like this as you drive around Houston. And this is, I'm just driving around Sugar Land. This is just out in, now granted, Sugar Land has certain advantages here in that they have zoning and they have some other things in place. But these can be instituted, these requirements, these detention storage areas, and the one on the lower left, I think, is actually up at the Bridgelands. I think that's a Bridgelands area. And so that may be in Harris County. And it's this Sugar Land style with lots of green space, lots of places for the water to be held and to go. And I don't care where you put it. You can put it in, the Texas Medical Center, they actually put in culverts underneath the parking lots. They put culverts down there to store water. I don't care how it looks. But more green space is gonna help everybody, and I think it's important that we go after that. And look at Buffalo Bayou. Buffalo Bayou is the jewel of the city. I'm dead set against anybody coming in there and trying to tamper with Buffalo Bayou. If you're gonna make changes, go up and make changes on the storage end. Do not make changes on the conveyance end. We've already learned that Brays and White Oak don't work. You'll get in the same condition if you do anything to Buffalo. You might sculpt it a little bit, but certainly it doesn't need it, nor does it want to be challenged. It's a gorgeous jewel of the city. And not only that, up until Harvey, Buffalo was a fabulous floodplain. It worked beautifully well, very, very limited flooding for many, many, many years. And Harvey was the flood of all floods. Let's go back to Meyerland, let's go back to Brays. And it's those two areas right there. There's an example. Okay, yeah, they're golf courses. I understand. I don't play golf. I play tennis. I know there are golfers out here, and I know you're mad and upset with me. But let's rent that golf course for a day. And it only takes a day. And 150 acres, 15 feet deep, both of them. And sculpt it, and let it flow in, and let it either pump it out or backflow it out. Go in and fix it after the flood. It's a lot cheaper than fixing thousands and thousands of houses that flood in Maryland. And why they haven't made a concerted effort at going after this is beyond me. So I'll make my plea here. And it won't solve it perfectly, but you'll get real close to 100-year flood protection doing this. There's Sugar Land, there's Meyerland. Look at all that green space. During Harvey, if you don't include Barker, we had about 4,000 homes flood out there. New territory, all of new territory down there. Huge area, one house flood, pump storage, and it worked. So there are some examples of what we can look to try to make Houston a better place, try to make Harris County a better place. It's not going to be easy because we've got a lot of legacy flooding. I understand that. We have a lot of places that need to be elevated on all of that. But in my final slide here, and I haven't said much. I had some flood warning slides in here, but I always do that as my first, because that's what I spent my time at Rice building flood warning systems, and we're building one for White Oak, and we've got one for Brays. And there needs to be flood warning for the whole city. There certainly needs to be flood warning systems for Addicks and Barker, big time. All right. Evaluate areas that didn't flood and better map those that did. Evaluate potential reservoirs out there. I don't want to say the third reservoir. I want to say multiple reservoirs. I'm not sure that a large single structural reservoir is the solution. I think it might have to be multiple reservoirs. But it needs to be stored, and we need to greatly expand that regional effort, and there needs to be massive modeling effort. Put all the engineers to work that are sitting in the room here, remodeling all of these watersheds. Put them all to work, and let's do it the right way. And by the way, along the way, let's not forget that the 100 year has gone from about 13 to 18 inches. Yikes. I mean, that means all the maps have to change anyway. That's all I got. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Happy to answer questions. Way back there, yes.
Would you still be able to play golf on those?
Not on the day of the flood, and perhaps not for, a few weeks after while they go in and clean out debris and other things. But I think that's that's a relatively, you know, you can get, maybe you can set up a scenario where you get to go play at other golf courses, right? So I mean, it's not the end of the world, but you've got to have that storage, and they just don't have it in Brays. That's the problem. They can still go later, just not on the daily. Other questions? Yes.
Just a quick question relative to the north side of Houston, Lake Houston, Kingwood, Humble. Could you just take a couple of minutes and speak to that area because it was hit severely?
Yes, it was. And I apologize for not spending time on that because they only gave me 30 minutes, but I'd be here in 45 minutes. I would include that area for sure. But I spent 3 years of my life actually studying Lake Houston back in the 80s on sedimentation and other issues. And yeah, there's a big problem up there. I mean, Kingwood and all of that, River Plantation, that whole area just got absolutely hammered by the water coming down from the San Jacinto. I have not studied that, so I don't know the exact issues with respect to the management of Lake Conroe and how those releases work. I know there are a lot of people looking at that, and you're absolutely right. That is a huge problem, and it's every bit as important as what's going on in Addicks and Barker. And I haven't said this, but I need to say this. We are just about to get approved for a major watershed planning study on Brays Bayou. And I'm very proud to say that we're going to do a Cadillac study of that watershed with the best minds in the city and the county, and do a university-style independent study of how that watershed needs to be addressed. So we are addressing the east side. Yes?
I have a question. I was kind of intrigued by the fact that you alluded to the fact that the loop was basically an earthen dam blocking the water from Ireland. Did I interpret
Yes.
that right?
Yes.
Well, I live in Jersey Village. There's a couple of people who do here, and
Yeah.
I've lived there 42 years. And I noticed Jersey Village never flooded before the Sam Houston Tollway was built. and I called it when they were building it and dumping all that dirt. I said, that's a nice earthen dam, and doggone it if it didn't flood after that. And so do y'all work with TxDOT? I've heard that during Harvey, I think Clint's still here, he drove out on 99 and saw that 99 seemed to be another earthen dam climbing up behind it. And as my common sense plumber said, who lives in a non-flooding area inside Sam Houston Tollway, he said, I'll tell you what's wrong, they didn't make the pipe big enough. You know, meaning the opening going through the tollway. So you work with TxDOT or whoever does those roads, those big roads?
You raise a very good point. Absolutely, if you look back at this graph, my big worry is that the western side of that is, of course, the Grand Parkway. It runs right through. That is the future of Houston. If they don't get the Grand Parkway correct, if they don't have the right storage options and potential out there, then we're going to just exacerbate the problem further west. And that's the whole point of this discussion is, yes, 610, there's no question the 610 is a backup. If you just count the number of piers, I mean, just go out there and count. There are about 25 piers under the 610 right at Meyerland, and that helps create the backup. So I agree with you 100%. Other questions? Maybe this guy's standing here, so that means I'm in trouble. One more question from anybody? You already asked a question, miss. Yeah.
There's a lot of construction going on in Houston for buildings and all. Why don't they put more detention associated with buildings that are going on now?
You talking about commercial buildings? Yeah. I think that, you know, I don't know the exact rules on those commercial buildings. A lot of them get built on top of parking lots, especially downtown Houston and maybe in Midtown. A lot of them go up on existing sort of parking spaces. And so the delta there is not all that, necessarily all that great. But I agree with you. I think there are rules for, depending upon the size of the development, that anything, I believe it's 10 acres, anything larger than 10 acres has to completely and totally handle their own runoff. I believe that's the rule. Now in Fort Bend County, the rules are even much more stringent. They're about 10 times as stringent as Harris County. Yeah. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.